co-founder and CEO at Adoption Share, which is the nonprofit technology organization that created the Family Match application. We are streaming live on YouTube. And super exciting. This is also the first time that we've ever done this. So if you are an avid YouTuber, just give us some grace today as we navigate these waters. We are joined by some of the folks on our team. So I will go ahead and just we can just do a round robin. If you guys will say your name, your role, and maybe give a little bit of an update on your program for perspective for the families that might be listening in. That'd be great. Maybe we'll start with Kimberly below me on the screen.
Sure. So, hello, everyone. I'm Kimberly Brown. I'm the Family Match Director for the state of Georgia. Good news coming out of Georgia. We have successfully made matches in all 3 of our piloted regions. So we now have 6 matches for a total of 8 children who have been identified, or their forever families being identified. So kudos to Georgia's families.
It's amazing.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Kimberly. All right. So next up, let's go to Christina. Or actually, you're going to do the intro, correct? So let's actually come to you last. Let's go to Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy Simpson. I'm the Vice President of Programs for Adoption Share and Family Match. I most recently have been in charge of the state of Florida, where we've been implemented for almost coming up on 4 years now. And we have over 700 kids matched, and over 320 of those have made it all the way to adoption. So Georgia, you got a little catching up to do, but we know you can do it. Florida, keep going.
And we are so grateful for Selfless Love Foundation. They are our strategic partners in the state of Florida that has made our adoption matching platform called Family Match available at no cost to agencies and families. So check them out, selflesslovefoundation.org. We're so grateful for their support. Not joining us today, but I'm sure she would if she could, is Michelle Giordano. She is our Director of Program Delivery for the state of Florida. So she sends her best wishes and regards, her kindest regards for not being here today. And then let's go to Libby, also joining us from the good state of Florida, the Sunshine State. So let me put this pin up for you. Go ahead, Libby.
Hi, I'm Libby Sopoviak. I am the family coordinator for Florida. And if you are tuning in and would like to get a training certificate today, you can email me at Libby, Libby, at adoption-share.com. And the code word for today's call is listen. So if I can get that by Friday, 5 p.m. Eastern, I will get you a certificate.
Awesome. Thank you, Libby. All right. Last but certainly not least, we have Christina, and she will be kicking off our talk today and also introducing our speaker.
Good morning. Good afternoon, it should be. I am Christina Mangillo, and I'm the family coordinator for the state of Georgia. And as Kimberly had said earlier, we are so excited about some of our families being matched. And I get the joy of walking alongside of families in Georgia here as they prepare their profile and to be considered for matches. So it's a fun opportunity for me. And as we're going through some of, interaction with families, we do realize the very topic we're discussing today, which is communication, the great importance it is, especially when we have such huge family altering going on through the adoption world. So today our guest is going to speak on communication. And for many of us that are going through those big family changes, we know that good communication is vital, but it doesn't always come easy. And it's something that can be learned and applied though. So our guest today, sharing with us some practical steps that will help us move into a place of better communication, is Laura Sant. She's a wife and a mother of 3 and a licensed marriage and family therapist. So welcome, Laura. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Christina. And thank you, ladies. I'm so touched by, I didn't expect to feel, I think, again, because I'm not dealing in the adoption world on a regular basis. So I feel quite emotionally moved by the work that you're doing. And I want to say thank you. And I wish that more people knew that, because I know that there's a I've seen the critical side, you know, that you probably have heard and felt and experienced. And so I just want to say, keep it up. I'm really, really touched. So it's my privilege to be here. And if I can offer you anything that can even help you personally, it may not be a direct link to your work, but if it's even something that helps you in your life and ease something for you, I'm going to ask that maybe you would be willing to play along with me a little bit and participate. I don't like giving speeches necessarily. I like to make it interactive and talk, and maybe that's what I'm used to as a therapist. I want to have a conversation, and I want to go deep, but you go as deep as you're comfortable. And if I ask any questions you're not comfortable saying, by all means, you know, you can pass on that. There's no pressure here. But like, you ever play a word association game? Just to start off, you ever do that? Like if I said dog, what comes to mind?
Cat.
Yeah, right.
Molly.
What's that? Molly, did someone name a dog? That's great. Yeah. So like you say one word and another one word comes up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I say communication, what comes up? Any words?
Talk.
Talk. Good. Any others?
Listen.
Listen.
Yeah. Anything? And that's
I think of translation.
okay. Good. Good one. Yeah. And so if I said effective or healthy communication, any more descriptions come up for you?
The use of my
Meaningful.
hands.
What's that? Use your hands. Anyone else?
Respectful.
Respectful, right? Mhm.
Meaningful.
That's two-way.
Two-way.
Patient.
Patient. Okay.
Meaningful.
Right. Meaningful. Good. These are all great words. And I think that I'm glad you're participating, because I'm sure anyone else who's listening to this now or later on will have similar words or feelings. And words you started to mention there were, you know, about character qualities or states of being, right? And all those are very important to effective communication. But what I want to dig into a little bit today is something that might even be found, I would consider foundational to that. And I'm also just want to not forget or give a bit of credit of what's built into me and a lot of my theory. And I do want to mention the Couples Institute and Dr. Ellen Bader and her husband, Dr. Peter Pearson, who developed what they call the developmental model. And a lot of their tools in the initiator and inquirer are what I base a lot of this conversation off of, okay, and what I'm going to be bringing. So I like that, you know, you talked about two-way, you know, and we talked about, I heard that word up there. I heard respectful, use hands. I tend to do that a lot. I don't know that it makes me any clearer, you know, but we'll see. And listening. But Dr. Bader, Ellen Bader, she talks about and like to use some different language, and language also, you know, brings your attention to what language we use shapes how we communicate, right? And how it's perceived. And an interesting focus, if we think of listening, we often think of that as a very passive thing. I have to just sit, I have to be quiet, and I have to listen. But instead they make a model of communication where we have an initiator and we have what they call an inquirer. And that's a mouthful to say, inquirer. And it's because your role as the listener, it addresses, and how that's supposed to be an active role. And for the sake of time, I'm not sure how much we'll get into that role, the second part of it. You know, we might dip into it now, but I want to even just start with the initiator. To if you're going to communicate, that means you're initiating something, right? You have something that you want to talk about to somebody. And foundational to that communication is really gaining clarity for yourself. And especially when it comes down to things of emotion, when you feel strong emotion. So, you know, it's one thing to prepare a speech, to talk to someone, you're communicating. I'm sure you have instructions that you communicate to families, and there is consideration of the recipient. But if you can imagine with me, and I'm really applying this to, if you think about an intimate relationship that you have or someone that you're very close with, because we can, it's a lot easier to be patient in the professional setting. You leave, but when you go home, you might find that's a little harder. I know I do, to practice with family members or when you're tired, right? And this is where it counts for us, right? How do we make a home and a family? And I mean, for your listeners, you know, who are really focused on building a family and bringing in children into the home and all the dynamics that go with that, a lot of effective communication is needed. And there's a lot of emotions that are probably running really high when you're in transition. And anxiety can be one feeling that I'll just put out there in a mention that we're going to really have to observe, because that can really run us amok if we don't check in on that and understand how it's maybe pushing us or motivating us. Well, let me just go back to the idea of initiating. So if you were to initiate something that was upsetting you, anybody like have anything in mind where they've tried doing that, or a talk that they've tried having with somebody where they felt upset with the family dynamic, or you wish something would change? Anything come to mind about how you handled it? Anyone ever experience, and I see smiles, anyone ever experience something where you thought it might have been so simple that you were just wanting, and it escalated out of control, and next thing you know, you're fighting and you're feeling tense and you need just to get away for a while, right? I'm not the only one, right? This happens, right? We're human. And a lot of times people say like, well, why did that happen? From our perspective, right? We think, I just was simply asking, could they please empty the dishwasher, which I have asked for the umpteenth time, and where did it go wrong? So I want to dig deep, into, well, what can make it more effective? And the first thing in any initiation, if you have to bring something up that's bothering you, I would say you need to establish the ability for some introspection to say, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? And what is it that I want? So some event happens. You could put whatever that event is. That could be from, I opened the door and saw my kid's room a mess again. It can be, anything from, I didn't like how my spouse just spoke to me. An event happens. Your spouse spoke to you, but then you had thoughts about how they spoke to you, or your child, right? And those thoughts can give you feelings. And then you take actions. But if we're not clear on what it is we're thinking and what it is we're feeling and what it is we would like, that has to be the foundation of the communication to give it the best possible outcomes for ourselves, right? So I call this a reference point, and I'm not a mathematician by any stretch, so maybe I'll get myself into hot water trying to use a little example or analogy, but the idea that in measuring movement anywhere in the world, right, or you need a reference point. You cannot tell if an object is moving if there's not some stationary object for you to compare it to, to see that it's moving, and then to measure its speed or how it's moving. And often when we launch into discussions and or we try to initiate something that we would like addressed that has some emotional connection for us, or intensity for us, if we are first pinpointing our stationary point, right, our reference point, being clear on what it is I think about this, what is it I feel, and what is it I want, what it is that I would like. If we're not clear on that to ourselves, when we go into the conversation, there's going to be so much opportunity for confusion or conflict. And one way I will fill this in to make sense is if let's say I'll use the messy room. My kid's room's a mess. I open the door again. I feel upset. I ask them so many times. So I just open the door and say, your room is a mess again. I've told you I want, to clean this. You need, it's never clean. Now, any idea how that might go over with my kid, the teenage kid? Anyone experience something like that? Right? And then you get frustrated, right? There's less miles. So if the child then says, I did too clean the room. You ever have that one? And now you're arguing about, well, how much did they clean the room or not clean the room? Because the reference point was to the child is, you said this room wasn't clean, and now I'm measuring from that all the times I'm clean. and then you try to regain and prove that it is a mess, and you're arguing about, is it a mess or not? And you walk away totally frustrated and disconnected and tension filled. But when you clarify, you say, okay, well, what happened here? If I clarify, and now I'm going to layer in a little more too, and I'll say it like a mantra because I think it helps us, because I would love this to be a template in your mind, what it is I'm thinking, what it is I'm feeling about this, and what it is I want. And now I'm going to add the word vulnerable in there to help, because this doesn't work if you say, I think that person's an idiot, excuse me, I think this is like, that's not vulnerable, right? It's what am I thinking about this situation? And maybe if I identify that, well, let's say my child or my son is a teenager, and I actually had a thought that was so fast that gave me a feeling that I didn't bring it to my full consciousness. And maybe that thought was, if his room isn't, and it might link to a belief, that is trying to form in me. If his room's not clean, how will he function in life? I will have failed as a mother, right? I can have all this added stuff that's giving me such intense emotions about wanting him to clean the room. Now, if I feel anxiety about that and don't get clear on it, if I go to communicate to my son to clean the room, do I really want that room clean so that it lowers my anxiety, but I'm not revealing that to him? Instead, I'm keeping the conversation on him. Look at you. Look at your messy room. Look what you're doing. And then he's going to keep the conversation on him. I do clean my room. I just did this now. Mom, this wasn't a mess before. I'm in the middle of a on and on. But was I clear to myself what it is I would like? Now, that's not to say everything is just, if I feel anxious, I get over it. I may want his room cleaner, and there could be a legitimate concern. But then my clarity could shift and say, I understand. I'm seeing your room a mess right now. It's making me feel uncomfortable, because maybe even the mess just tense. It's making me feel uncomfortable, and this is what I would like, right? You have a clear spot from a vulnerable place. I say, this is how it makes me feel, and this is what I would like. Now that's the first part. I initiated something. When you have inquirer skills, if you're on the receiving end, you can talk about, hey, well, what about that? Or if I did this, there can be discussion, but can I also maintain my view of how I feel, but then be able to listen to where someone else feels, right? And it helps if they're able to clearly say what it is they think, feel, and want in a vulnerable way. Now, if I had constantly been on making my child, transferring my bad feelings about the room onto them, and they feel bad every time, and it's a tension-filled thing, if I start shifting this, it may not shift right away because their fight, flight, or freeze is up, right? They already are going into, the old pattern, and they may still try, their mind may still try. But if I still can hold and not bait to argue from a point of reference outside of myself, and then it takes away all argument, I'm just communicating where I'm at. And that gives other people their own autonomy to respond to that, to hear that and to respond, and then to engage in connection. And when we say what we would like in a vulnerable way, we offer an opportunity, yes, for us to be disappointed. That's possible. And maybe that's why we avoid it sometimes. But it also is an opportunity for us to have who we love move toward us. To give us maybe those strokes that we're looking for in a healthy way. Like if you oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. This is a mess, right? Like I can get on this. I see, because then I'm asking my son to do something I'm revealing where I'm at, and then he could decide, can I offer this to my mom? She showed me where she's at. What can I do because of this relationship? As opposed to he has to defend himself because I made the point of reference his messy room, and I didn't make it a vulnerable point of reference. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit. You're all with me though there? Is any questions come up, or anybody? And if anyone wants to share anything, I'd love to.
I have a question. Let me see if I can do this to where it looks like we're having a conversation. So I guess my question is, when you are initiating the communication, and it is on something that it's not like, hey, there's a free dinner that's available at the corner of such and such and such and such. and you actually are going to someone and kind of needing to call them out or call something into discussion that's difficult or uncomfortable, how can you, is there like the beginning of that question or statement that doesn't go directly to making it about them? Because arguably the conflict is the point of reference that you're trying to resolve, right? So whether it's a messy room or, something, from that whole pendulum of potential controversy in life, like how do you not make it, because if the conflict is tied to the person to whom you're communicating with, that feels like mental jujitsu to try to not make it go that way. Do you have like just a tip or a trick for how to prevent that escalation?
Well, I don't know that it's yours to prevent, but it's yours to respond. Again, once new information comes, there's a new event. If it's going in a way that you're not comfortable with, your practice of getting clear on, wait, what is it I'm thinking about this? What is it I'm feeling? And what is it I want? Again, so that can shift. So maybe I initiate about the room. My son, let's say if he talked back to me, and what if he snipped at me? It just went wrong right off the bat. And I could have said my approach was fine. I just brought it up, right? I just saying, hey, I'd like to talk. I could say right then there, the way you spoke to me right now made me feel not respected or cared for. I would like to be able to talk about this with you without you making little comments like that. And I'd like to hear maybe more vulnerably where you're at. Now I made an ask, you see? So it's continuing to define. And that takes practice, because if you're flooded emotionally, it's really hard to access this. And that's why I repeat these words over and over, because it takes a practice of consciousness when you're not flooded to be able to hold on to that should emotions rise. And that's a lot of in my work with couples. It's giving them the opportunities even in session to practice this, and to be able to not flood and keep that in check and coach them through that, even though it feels awkward, right? It gives their brain a new experience of success so they can hold on to that longer, in practice outside. But to your point, Thea, there are some things that if I back up, so I wanted to just initiate like that. It starts with you knowing yourself, getting clear. Yeah. So where does that fit into the big picture? And you're asking, I'm hearing also inherent to your question, it's really good. You're saying, well, where am I then in reference to the other person? What's going to happen here? So one thing you can ask yourself too is what kind of qualities do you want to have as an initiator? And as qualities came up, like someone said patient when we think of, communication and things like that. So if you're initiating, a big part is also discovering, how do I want to be? And is considerate one of them? And maybe practicing that self-awareness. Am I stressed all day about this? And then does my spouse walk in the door and boom, I hit him between the eyes because I want to unload and get this anxiety off of me or this weight off of me. And I'm having trouble containing those emotions, whether it's, I can't believe the kids did this, or I had a horrible day. Are we able to say, hey, now that might be a little easier for them to take in some ways if it's not about them, but what if it's, I'm upset directly with something that this, that my spouse or this other person's doing? Do we hit them between the eyes once we see them? And that's kind of like the idea of if I open my son's door, I don't even, let's say my stress level goes so high, I don't even say hi. I'm like, oh my gosh, your room, it's a mess again, right? And it puts the tension right out there. Where if we're aware of the other person and we want to be respectful and we want to be considerate, we can say, hey, is now a good time I'd like to talk, or be aware of, and give them some autonomy instead of springing it on. And now they feel trapped that they're on the spot to answer, but they're not a participant. It's like, I'm going to hold you down while I vet this, and you're going to solve it now for me because I'm upset, Mm-hmm. And so that's a really big component. So a lot of times I'll do steps, with clients, I'll identify, their cycles or what hiccups them, spirals them out. And you say, oh, like where maybe one person is, I do get too aggressive. I have to manage and work on my feelings. I want to be calmer when I speak. And maybe you're fairly calm, but everybody can respond differently to that. Someone else, that might be a more trigger. Maybe if you're the inquirer, if you're the role is to receive something, you have to also work on saying, how do I not, maybe I don't want to be defensive. What qualities do I want to have? Do I want to be thoughtful? What kind of questions can I say? How do I make this not about me, but it's about that person? They're trying to tell me something that's, for them. So those are all things. So a lot of times, even in session, I'll say, what are 3 character qualities you want to have, when you're initiating, and or if you're receiving, and do I have your permission to hold you accountable to that? Like, if, in a gentle way, say, hey, I think, you want it to be like this. Is this, just to do a self-check-in? Am I being what I want? So having those goals for yourself ahead of time can be very helpful. And in family dynamics, this can work. A whole family can learn this type of communication, as far as being clear on what it is you think, feel, and want, and that respect of, hey, is now a good time for you? Can we talk? And the best way to avoid, to the best of your ability, like you said, it not spiraling on the other person. You can't control if they're going to be defensive. You can't control if they're going to make everything about themselves. That may be their struggle at that point, coming from a place of fear or anxiety if they're flooded. And this can apply to children very easily. So I'm sure you can imagine a lot of scenarios where this could come in. But when you maintain that consistency, it takes, and keep drawing them back to, you're inviting them in to respond, and you're listening, but you have to be, clear on your starting reference point. And another thing that can help with that is raise one issue, because sometimes issues are multi-layered. There's, and feelings are very multi-layered, which makes this so hard. You can feel sad about something and confused. You can feel angry. All these different emotions can interlay, and sometimes teasing out complicated situations can be really hard to get clear on what it is that we actually think or feel. And then, well, let me just pause there. Does that answer your question though, or does that have more?
Yeah, I think it's helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other questions or? Mm-hmm. All right. So a little bit more, if I'll dig into it a little bit more. Another aspect, so if you're initiating something that's upsetting or emotional to you, I wanted to explain a little bit about the brain and how it works with the emotion, right? So we have this wonderful design that we were created with our brain to keep us safe, where we have that fight, flight, or freeze mechanism, right? So if I saw, danger coming, if I saw something like flying really fast through the air toward me, I can take action very quickly to avoid pain. And really, our brain is doing it for us all the time. It's scanning without us thinking much about it, how to keep us safe. We have schemas that we create, like through experience. And to explain what I mean, if you're teaching a child, hey, this is a dog, like a toddler, and they go, oh, dog, okay, we see what that is. And then a cat walks by and they go, doggy, and you go, well, no, actually that's a cat. So now they're altering their schema. And that's how our brain works in pictures to make things efficient, right? So we're not relearning the same thing. That's a very simplistic way for me to explain. We're not relearning it every time. So a young child who may not have an experience with a big object might not know to, like, hey, that bridge doesn't look stable, let's run. They just might, toddle out to it or not see danger, right? But the more schemas we have and the more we understand, our brain will operate very quickly to protect us, to make decisions. When they found out through like imaging of the brain that the same part of our brain that lights up for physical threat or danger or pain lights up for emotional threat or pain. So if we have the potential to feel sad or embarrassed or uncomfortable, any negative type of emotion, we feel disregarded, or that's going to light up that fight, flight, or freeze mechanism in us. And that's why it's so important to get clear on, is what am I thinking about this and what am I feeling? Because if we operate only out of instinct, and sometimes it's going to happen. You ever get flooded and you just react, and then you back up and say, okay, I'm sorry, I overreacted. Because the brain is just doing its job to try to say, wait, that could hurt me, so I'm going to keep it away from me so I don't feel the pain. right? I don't feel anything painful. And on an emotional level, if, if I'm saying, hey, I looked at my son's room, to use this again, and if it was a mess, and if my thought was that I didn't get clear on was, I'm afraid he won't function in life if I don't teach him to keep this clean, that's maybe that's not a good feeling. That's a painful feeling for me as a mom. So I'm speaking to him out of that pain intensely in that moment. It comes out because what I'm really trying to do is get rid of that negative feeling. But the idea is that I have to own that negative feeling and decide, but what is it that I really want and get clear on? Because if I'm always reacting and always initiating things just so I can feel good in the moment, I'm not managing, wait, what am I thinking? What am I feeling and why? And what do I want? And then I don't usually get satisfied either with the results. But if I can say, oh, yeah, well, that would make me, and then we have a choice to challenge that thought. So maybe I have to challenge and say, you know what? That's crazy. Why was I feeling pressure? He's going to be fine. I even have a messy room at times. Where'd that worry come from? It was a thought that was worrying me, and I can challenge that thought and dismiss it. Or I can say, no, I want validity to that thought, and I'm going to require some things. Or I have a mixture, so we just have decisions that we can make along the way, but we take responsibility and autonomy for our communication when we're clear on what's going on within us.
Mhm.
Any thing that bring up for anybody else, or any questions, or are your brain?
It's not a question, but I was taking note on some of the stuff, and I was like, wow, I really need to work on clarifying and defining a little bit better. But just thinking specifically with my family, because I'm a mom of 8 children and 5 are adopted, and thinking specifically with that, I would perceive sometimes if I did initiate a conversation, the silence was sarcasm to me from some of the children. Only recently, in the past few years, I realized that some of my kids need the silence to ponder it. And that came from my husband. I used to lay it on him and expect, like, we're going to hash it out until it's done, and realizing, no, he wants it laid out, and then we'll regroup in a couple of days so he can process it. But I was literally viewing that as sarcasm. Yet with that said, there is half of my children, or at least 5 of them, their silence is oftentimes sarcasm to me. It is being ignored. So I think knowing the person is something I've been learning. It isn't just each one I have to react or speak to or initiate it differently. At least in this family. I know outside our family, I don't know what that person's like, but that has helped me a lot. So I just wanted to add that point.
I appreciate it. I love that you also brought up how it can vary. A response doesn't necessarily mean the same thing from someone. So you're having an experience from it. And when you can clarify, what am I feeling and why? What am I thinking about that? If you expose that in a vulnerable way, you might get feedback. Now, granted, given if a child has the skills then to say, and has been encouraged to say, well, Mom, this is what I'm thinking, and this is what I would like. And, I would like to be able to think about it, or they have an opportunity to speak to their intent. If you're saying, hey, I'm feeling like you're being sarcastic to me, and they're saying, no, Mom, that's not my desire. You have a conversation about that, because you're sharing your perception and how you're experiencing them. And that's really important kind of feedback to give to a child, where they can learn that they can explore or communicate what they think or feel without that being having to force them to change that, or hide that, or just to please, an angry parent, maybe they come back that experience, or to want approval, that they can say where their reference point is, and then you can have a discussion about it. And I also like that you brought up, Christina, breathing room, because a lot of times we don't think of that, as sometimes we are in different places, as far as processing speeds. And if we're flooded emotionally, also that space can help to get to a place where you can think. Because if let's say if a child's very sensitive and wants to please you, and they even just pick up that a parent is slightly displeased with them, if they don't feel secure in their attachment there, or they just feel anxious, their brain, your thinking becomes much more rigid. Like if you're anxious, you're not, thinking freely, creatively, relaxed, able to reflect. That's that fight, fight, flight, or freeze mode. Everything is orienting in their brain is just to stop the threat of maybe your disapproval, or stop the threat of, feeling detached or feeling less than, or whatever negative thought or feeling they may be having, where the idea is for them to be able to relax enough to focus on you, without being paralyzed by that as well. So yeah, being able to talk to children, about, hey, what are you thinking about this, or what are you feeling, is a real important thing in how we handle when they do bring something to us. Because a lot of times we've learned to ignore this. Like if you say, hey, I'm upset, and maybe it's well-intentioned, and maybe in a few cases there's a place for it. But if we say, hey, get over it, you'll be fine, buck up, like, do we dismiss, or do we help them process? Or if our child is anxious, is it making us anxious? And are we just trying to fix it and solve it? And, let me just distract and get rid of that feeling. Or do we say, oh, wow, I see you're anxious about that. What are you thinking? And how, learning how to explore that so they can learn to self-soothe and say, or maybe even challenge the thoughts that are behind it, in terms of the thinking, and maybe I'm getting a little more into this than I thought. So I hope I'm not, you're all with me, but I want to put in another layer to it, because there's a lot to this. But let's just say if your child is anxious and you want to help them, with that anxiety, getting clear on what they're thinking or what they're feeling would be really, really important, right? But again, remember the reference point with you. What is this doing with me? Because anxiety is very contagious. Again, I think that's a survival mechanism that we were designed with. Like they say, if I looked across a crowd of people, if they all looked like they were panicking, that signals my, excitatory system. That gets my adrenaline going just right away, because I'm thinking they might not be safe. That could be, I'm not safe. Maybe I'll run before I walk into something, and from a safe place, figure out what's going on. So it does help keep us, alive. But we have to be able to assess if there truly is a threat or not, right? Because sometimes that just gets triggered very quickly or more easily for some than others. And for instance, if I had a bad dream and it gave me a really negative feeling, it's really easy for you to understand and say, well, that was a dream. It's not reality, right? So even though I felt maybe sad, and it's weird that you can be like, it's weird, I feel sad, but it was this dream. So those thoughts, those images gave us a feeling. Now, if I said, well, I'm going to take some action based on those feelings, or let's say I had a dream that gave me a feeling, that I wasn't, safe or anything, do I take action, based on that dream? You say, no, it's not reality. It's not true. You have to assess what's, really happening for you to make decisions for actions. So another example, I'm just going to give, I like different imagery to help link it. Let's say I pretend I love gardening, and I'm always in my garden. Let's say it's my happy place, and I always bring my hose out to it, and I never wind the hose back up. I leave it in the grass because I'm out there every day and loving it. I'm a little lazy about that. And it always gives me a good feeling, a good association. I can't wait for my harvest. But then let's say one day, a snake slithers by my feet while I'm gardening and totally alarms me, and I go running, screaming. I didn't think about it. Hey, I better race. I better get my heart rate up. My heart rate went up. I ran to the porch. I'm sweating. I even may scream involuntarily. So my voice, everything constricts. I get loud. I'm screaming because there's a threat, and I'm tensed up, and I'm at the house. Now I want to go out to my garden the next morning. My heart's beating fast. Tension's going through my body. I didn't think or ask about that, but I have an association with something, that scared me, and I'm associating. My brain has a scheme. It goes, oh, garden, there's some danger there. We just experienced something there. Let's warn you. Are you safe? My job is to assess, okay, just because my body is re-alarming from that, am I safe or not, right? So maybe I decide I'm too scared. If I'm going to listen to my body and I don't like that feeling, I don't like the tension, let's say I don't like the uneasy queasy in my stomach, I decide to avoid the garden. I said, well, I'm not going to do it today because it just makes me feel bad. And then my anxiety goes down, all that relaxes because I didn't make myself go in the garden. And now let's say I do it the next day. I've just shrunk my world and I'm missing out on the opportunity of that garden because I was making decisions based on my feeling, right? Each day, even though there was no snake at that time, it was appropriate when the snake, let's say, passed by that I get to safety because I didn't know to see if it was poisonous or not, or if it would hurt me. That we would say is a reasonable threat. But now I have this association. I'm constantly avoiding that garden, but I'm doing it because I'm tuned into, I don't like the feeling that snake every time I remember it. So now I don't have to remember, I don't have to think about it, and I go on and that just gets pushed away. But if I say, no, I love gardening too much, I'm going to go to the garden, I'm really nervous, but I'm making myself do it despite how I feel, right? That experience. And I'm checking maybe a little more vigilantly. And after time, let's just say I get reacclimated and I'm not so jumpy about it. My brain is still scanning. My brain still had an experience where this was a hurtful place. And maybe I'm really good for a while. And then all of a sudden, I'm jumping, running up to the porch again, totally freaked out that I saw a snake. But somewhere along the line, I look back and I realize, I don't think that was a snake. Oh, that was my hose in the grass. Totally faked me out. That hose, I never mistook it for a snake before, but suddenly this hose that just was part of my joyful experience of gardening, just, it looked too similar, was in a situation, and my brain was like, oh, wait a minute, could be danger. And my brain did its job. Quick, get the adrenaline going, get her heart rate going so she could get to safety, and now I'm in safety. But now I assess and say, oh, that was like a false alarm. That was, I had a thought that could be a snake. All this stuff happened in my body, so which didn't happen before if I thought that, right? And now I have to make a decision. If I said, oh, no. Yes, maybe the hose, but I felt it was a snake. It felt the same. It had to be the snake. It's not safe because I felt it. I felt everything I felt when there was a snake there. You see that? All those feelings just came up. So if I say, oh, I'm not going there because I don't like those feelings and I don't know how to get past it. And what I'm kind of tipping into a little bit would be a lot of trauma work, for people. Like if it was something, if it gives you like a framework to understand the mind. And if a child had a really negative experience, let's say in a kitchen, and then you adopt a child from a difficult, background or a foster care background, and you come in the kitchen and you may not know why all of a sudden their brain trips because their brain says, wait, we've been in this scenario before. We remember this, right? And there's an emotional flooding or reaction that might not make sense to you. And that's not necessarily the topic of this, but it's something to be aware of in communication, how, and in that process, which, but in this case, I'm using it for you, for the reference point to yourself, because that's where you're going to lead the most, kind of like put the oxygen mask on yourself, they say in the airplane, before you help your child. So as you practice this, it'll be better able for you to be aware for your children is to say, wait, what am I reacting to? And is it valid? I have to assess. So maybe I assess that, yeah, I felt triggered, but that wasn't really a threat. So like for Christina's example, that silence may still trigger her in a sense, like I'm feeling like this is sarcastic, but she's saying, okay, even though I'm feeling this feeling of like, I just was disrespected and it feels painful. She's saying, I now have to assess, was that based on, was that a misread or was that something that's happening? It's still her experience, right? And so that takes that, but when she can be clear on what she's thinking and feeling and why, she can expose that in a vulnerable way to make that conversation happen or to make that discovery to assess. As opposed to if someone had that experience, let's say, I don't like it, I'm feeling disrespected. If we react out of that feeling and just assume because we had the feeling it's reality, and if we don't like it and can't tolerate it and we want it to stop, a lot of times we'll just reach over to the other person and try to control them to make our pain go away. But that just puts their fight, flight, or freeze on, and it's not soothing to us. So it really takes a lot of inner strength to say, I need to figure this out, and I need to calm my system down, get on the deck for a minute, get away from the garden for a moment, get away from the interaction, and think, wait, what was that just happened? What am I thinking? And what were my thoughts about it? And was my thought accurate? Is there truth to that thought? Is that what's really happening, even though it felt that way? And maybe there is, and then you decide your decision. Well, what do I want then? What am I going to communicate?
I think what I really one of my big takeaways from your conversation today is on just how powerful it is to have those moments of self-reflection. And I'm also thinking for our families, and also for my own personal life, how much I've benefited by having a diverse group of compassionate truth tellers in my life, where I can help process through what I'm thinking or feeling, because I'm approaching a reaction with the little grain of salt to think, maybe my perception, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the reality. And if I can bring in people who I respect and that I think have wisdom, even if their read on it is completely counter or opposite to what I feel, I value that input because it helps ground me in having a bigger, a bigger sense of what might be happening in real life versus this is just the way that I'm seeing it from where I'm sitting. So I think that's just, and I'm thinking about, we just started It Takes a Village call for our families post-adoption. We'll be implementing a call for our families with placements. And I think it just reinforces, for me, the value of bringing people together and giving them that space where they can get another person's perspective. It's not something that means that you have to adopt that person's perspective, but it just kind of gives you more information to sort of, assess really the severity of something or how you need to respond moving forward. So, yeah, it's a good affirmation that we're really helping our families, I think, and moving in that direction.
I love hearing that. Any other thoughts or processes I love hearing? Also, if you do gain another perspective, I want to encourage and remind all listeners that it doesn't mean you have to stuff then or dismiss what you think or feel. So the idea is it's that being vulnerable, where if you might have done this because we're human, we do this, but you might be familiar with this. If someone does something and you kind of felt hurt by it, or an offense, and you're like, well, I know they were tired. So you have their perspective, or I know. So to just be sure it doesn't cross over to maybe you're making, and that might help. It is important to say, hey, look, they're tired. And there is a time with, in family, give some grace. Okay, yes. But it doesn't mean we have to stuff. There's still that, even though you're tired, if their behavior was affecting you in a certain way, it's okay for you to reveal and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking, or just, hey, your tone just kind of made me feel not so great right now. That leaves open, like, oh, I'm so sorry, hold accountable, as opposed to not being seen. Because what sometimes happens is we avoid that conflict because we don't want to feel uncomfortable. We stuff, and we keep, and to watch that trap of, I just rationalized, I just made all these other, excuses for them. And then next thing you know, you're exploding and you're thinking, if anyone had a hidden camera on me, I'd be so embarrassed because, you just lost your stuff because all that pressure built up. So it's very important that managing that too, to say, hey, and in a very non-threatening way, it's just say, oh, I just felt uncomfortable when you spoke. And sometimes it's okay to say, and I'm not sure why, I'm not sure why, something just made me feel uncomfortable, that developing those relationships where we can be vulnerable and intimate, with how we feel, and practice that care and concern. Then the other one says, oh, I'm sorry, I would never want you to feel comfortable. Like, how do you get back, or do you get dismissed? And then you say, hey, I feel like you're dismissing me. And these are all tools to train in communication, because we have 1,000,001 ways how we can avoid, anything that feels emotionally painful.
Yeah, I also feel like
she froze, right?
Yeah, you're froze.
There she is.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, it's unstable internet. So let me know if I freeze again. But I was just going to say how I think faith is another, having perspectives from other people, multiple people, I think is a golden resource. And I think faith for many of our families can be an invaluable resource as well, particularly around the idea of forgiveness and keeping just short accounts, and almost like the discipline of exercise or meditation, being able to kind of like self-evaluate, am I holding on to grudges or bitterness, or do I have anyone that I need to forgive, even if that person hasn't asked for forgiveness? It's just releasing that. And I think by doing that, you sort of, doesn't necessarily bring closure to the real pain and injustice of maybe what you've experienced, but you let it go, and hopefully I think there's the downstream effect of not having a whole locker full of emotions that's just waiting for the right opportunity to come pouring out. So I think just kind of that hygiene of letting go of the things that ultimately they might make us feel validated in those moments where we hang on to them, but ultimately are burdensome and can come out in other ways in a negative spaces. So particularly for caring from anyone that has had a traumatic background, keeping those short accounts. And because I think that the accumulation of those, hiccups in communication can just build to the point that now all of a sudden you're just fireworks all the time, so anyways, this has been really, I've really gained a much more profound sense of how complex communication really is. I think we feel like it's a lot easier said than done. But this, I really love how you've anchored this in just the person's, your own self's awareness, being self-aware, being reflective. I think is such a wonderful reminder. Do we have any other questions before we wrap up today, guys? Anything I've been monitoring and I haven't seen anything come through on Instagram.
Well, while you look, it's not a question, but I love the story of the snake example, because, I've had a couple of our adoptive children, they would react, almost seem a bit rude in situations. Well, I do hate snakes too, but they would almost seem rude in some of the situations. And then I wanted to correct that early on in the days. And then hearing this, it was a great example. I wish I'd heard it back then, but just trial and error, I came to realize that those situations did indeed trigger something. And for one child in particular, it was a certain type of person that if they were involved in a situation, even at church or a store, they would become almost rude and cold. And that certain person triggered a memory for them. But I'm thankful for that. And I hope people can kind of hear that too, that another part, what I've gotten from this is being watchful. Yes, listening and all that, but being watchful, because as I followed the pattern of when she would get that way, they all connected, and I was able to speak into that lovingly. And now I'm quite sensitive of that. And she's able to recognize that it's no longer the snake, it's a garden hose, and you're okay. And you can start to, show trust little by little. But I was thankful for that example.
Yeah. And how important it is that you're able to see yourself separate, as a separate person than your child, because if we're not clear on that, we have expectations on ourselves, like, oh no, let's say if the child was looking like they were rude, in this case to someone outside, if your ego gets involved, and if it's your fear, if you're not clear, like, oh, does that make me look like a bad mom? We quick just can try to steamroll the kid, like behave, be nice, say hello, like do whatever the action is you want them to change, as opposed to saying, okay, I feel a little embarrassed. Why? Because I'm having a thought I might be judged. Get clear on that. It allows you to challenge that, like to say, you know what? I can let that go. Let me recenter myself on that's a thought that made me feel anxious. What's going on? Let me see my child as separate. And so I love how Christina is watching out to say, hey, what's going on with my child that's separate from me? It's not a reflection necessarily of me. We have to be really clear on those thoughts that go through subconsciously that trigger, strong emotional reactions in us,
Thanks, Laura. Good stuff.
Yeah. Well,
Awesome.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Libby, do you want to just maybe remind our families how they can get a training certificate for this by watching? And
Yes, absolutely. If you'd like to get a training certificate, I believe most of our agencies will honor them. You can email me at Libby, Libby, at adoption-share.com. And the code word is listen. And I just need it by this Friday, the 18th by 5 p.m. Eastern. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, great. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you on next month.
Thank you so much. And thank
Bye.
you all for your bravery to take risks and put yourself out there, even as adoptive parents. I know that's not easy to do. And so I just encourage you to keep going with being brave and being vulnerable.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.